So with the very anticipated new season of the One Punch Man anime coming soon, I think right now is the appropriate time to make this video. We can expect the chapters that will be adapted and cover the very mysterious concept of the Limiter, which is extremely important to the story due to it being a power system that's set in place that explains how certain characters become so powerful, like Saitama. And although we know that there is another system in place, that being Monsterization, that also gives power to many of our characters, that they aren't exactly the same thing, but rather work alongside with each other. And so that's why I bring you this video where I explain the Limiter and go in depth into many of the questions I have about this very mysterious power system that is so intertwined with the main theme of the story at its core. Now, before the video does begin, there will be spoilers for season 3 of the anime and the manga and even the webcomic. And in this video, I did try my best to not really spoil too much, but it's extremely hard to do so, especially when the Limiter is so connected to the story. So without further ado, proceed with caution. The Limiter was first introduced into the story of One Punch Man in chapter 88. Of the manga titled The Limiter, in which we see the S-Class hero Zombie Man on the hunt for Dr. Genus and his organization known as the House of Evolution. And when he does find the hideout of where the rest of the House of Evolution members reside in, which is hidden in a takoyaki stand, he then confronts Armored Gorilla, who then informs Zombie Man that the House of Evolution no longer exists. This is where Zombie Man is then welcomed inside to go speak to Dr. Genus. And when they meet up for the first time in over 10 years, Zombie Man almost exacts his revenge on Dr. Genus by preparing to swing an axe onto his head, but stops himself to question Dr. Genus about why he discarded the House of Evolution. Dr. Genus replies to this with him explaining what he saw on that fateful day that Saitama and Genos infiltrated the House of Evolution. Dr. Genus says that he came to the conclusion that everything that he has done and researched and idealized about artificial evolution in order to change the world has been crushed by the massive realization that there is a greater power out there. A power that's able to change everything as we know it, the Limiter. Zombie Man questions this Limiter, and this is when we get over 8 pages of Dr. Genus's theory about how the Limiter works, and I'm going to try my best here to break down each speech bubble that explains the Limiter, and of course I'm going to make it as simple as possible for you to understand. The first speech bubble goes as follows: every living being has a limit to how much they can grow. So imagine a person, animal, monster, or creature, etc., right, on a graph, and on this graph there is an imaginary line or ceiling above them, and that is their limit. Now this limit is very possible to reach if you train hard enough. The next line he says goes as follows: too much power brings burdens to the wielder, that creates issues. They could become a rampaging and mindless monster. Time and time again in the story of One Punch Man, we have seen what happens when someone or something obtains incredible power. They either become enraged, drunk, or even be put in a mental state that harms them and others. For example, Boros was an extremely powerful individual, and because of that he wanted to seek a worthy opponent to give him a real fight, but was unable to find any in his conquest. And this burden resulted in him becoming a bloodlusted conqueror, where he ended up killing hundreds if not millions of people, knowing he traveled the cosmos planet to planet invading homes. Marugori was someone who was obsessed with becoming the strongest in the world, and when he transformed into a titan with the help of an artificial serum from his brother, who was also obsessed with his steroid experiments, which made him go crazy and mad, much like Dr. Genius, Marugori gained an insane amount of power, and because of that he went on a rampage, destroying several cities and taking lives. But most importantly, Saitama suffers from the burdens of surpassing his limits. He is too strong. Although he didn't become a literal monster, but instead losing his hair, he can no longer feel any emotions of excitement that come with a battle. Dr. Genius says in the next speech bubble, "This is why God created every living being with a range of growth that ensures their own sanity and survival. And this God is able to grant supernatural powers and abilities to whomever succumbs to their obsessive desires or to whomever comes into contact with him. And this God may also be the reason why the world of One Punch Man even exists, but that's unconfirmed and entirely unknown to us right now." And another interesting thing to point out is that since God is speculated to be the creator of the Limiter by Dr. Genius, which prevents humanity from suffering the consequences of becoming monsters, then why even allow monsters to be a thing in the first place? I've always thought the reason why creatures like these monsters exist is because there is some kind of underlying system set in place in order to balance out the universe, but that's probably a video for another day, and I'll leave that to your own interpretation and speculation. In the final speech bubble explaining the limiter, he says, "This growth restriction is called a limiter." So we know that this very mysterious omnidimensional divine-like being known as God created the limiter so that humanity doesn't turn into crazy monsters, protecting humanity in a way, right? But how can this limiter ceiling that's been placed on everyone be broken or even removed? Well, as Dr. Genius puts it when he explains how Saitama was able to do it to Zombie Man, he says, "Through effort alone, he pried open the door of his limits and broke his limiter." Now, this line from Dr. Genius may not really explain a whole lot, but from what I have seen in the story and, using some context clues here and there, I can explain to you how some characters in the story were able to do it. Saitama was an ordinary person with no special superpowers or talent, but one day Saitama had a very fiery will lit up deep inside his soul, mind, and body. That day he fought and killed the monster Crablante in order to protect the bald-chinned kid, is when he realized from this day forward he wanted to be strong. And so with his training regimen combined with his hero duties, going day to day killing and essentially punching threats like monsters or criminals, all at the same time with this burning desire that he had to become a strong hero, he was able to grow at an extremely fast rate, where he eventually, of course, broke this limiter and eventually removed it. So there you have it. First, a person must have a deep obsessive desire, then that person must then chase this desire through hard work, and slowly but surely they will be able to break through, manifest, and transform into what they desired most. Now, it doesn't just have to be physical strength either. This can apply for superpowers and abilities one already has, or even intellect, like with Dr. Genius. So if a character puts the hard work backed by a desire, then that attribute will improve and increase in output, where they eventually reach their limit or break it. Another important thing to point out is that in chapter 92, Giro explains to Garo that a near-death experience or conquering a situation in which you are on the verge of death can lead to an explosive growth, which will get you closer to your limiter exponentially. Now, this is probably due to an upsurge of emotion that stimulates that fiery will that someone may have, just like how Saitama was able to grow at an extremely fast rate, enough to where a cosmic Garo who was given the knowledge of how all energies and forces in the universe work by the entity God was able to copy Saitama's powers and moves, was still unable to keep up with him, as seen in chapter 168. Sure, Saitama wasn't dying exactly per se, right? But Saitama also hadn't felt that rush or feeling of anything that could even remotely match him in power. And because Saitama had removed his limiter, then he was growing extremely fast and limitlessly. Garo is not able to copy that limitless power and growth of rate that Saitama has. So thus, Saitama became even more stronger. So now you know how characters are able to break and remove their limiter, but how does the limiter work alongside monsterization? It's pretty simple actually. When someone or something starts to monsterify, they lose their old limiter and it is replaced by a new one with a higher ceiling. We have seen this with Garo and his various transformations throughout the tail end of the Monsterization arc. Actually, we've seen it throughout the entire Garo saga. Every time Garo is put in a situation where he has to fight for his life and he ends up coming back stronger is when he breaks through a limiter. So now you know how the limiter works, and now you know how a limiter can be replaced by a new one. But one thing that has me scratching my head is, how come Saitama is the only character to have ever been able to remove his limiter? You know, honestly, you can just say the obvious answer of him being the main character, but that's just such a bad way of looking at it, and it's no fun at all. That's not how we do it over here on my channel. One has stated in an interview in the past that the limiter is not the reason why Saitama possesses incredible limitless power, right? So it begs the question, what makes Saitama so special? We know that Saitama had to work really hard in order to really start progressing all the way until he reached his limiter, and of course when he was on the verge of dying, getting beaten up every day just by fighting monsters, he was able to break through those limits and eventually completely removing it with that burning will and desire he has, right? And you could just say it's because of that desire, that obsessive will he has to become strong is the reason why he was able to remove it. But a lot of characters that we've seen also have a very burning will and desire, like Garo, even people like Bang, who go as far as to help Garo in order to help him guide him onto the right path. In fact, I've made 2 videos explaining a lot of potential characters who are able to remove or break their limits because of how much they chase those desires. So why is it that Saitama is the only one who's able to do it? Could it be perhaps that God is maybe using Saitama in a way in order to maybe, who knows, maybe sacrifice Saitama one day? Maybe he's building up Saitama so he can use him as the ultimate avatar. It's kind of hard to say. Maybe Saitama in the past was a god himself who's had his memory wiped out. You know, we're getting into very, you know, out of hand territories now, but it's very fun to speculate and very fun to think about it. We know that the mysterious being known as God also has an agenda. He has a thing against Saitama because he's super special. He's someone who removed his limiter. We know that God uses a lot of his avatars or beings or the creatures that he summons over to essentially put a stop to Saitama, and he has them label Saitama as the abominable fist that has turned against God simply because he has immeasurable strength and limitless power. And in the story we have seen how Saitama has been able to change the lives of people around him by simply being him. You know, for example, that day that he saved Glasses from that fan monster, he inspired Glasses, who is known as the Saitama 2.0, to become stronger, to be able to surpass his limits. And so probably God wants to stop Saitama from helping all of these other characters from potentially removing their limiter. And why would God stop all of these characters from removing their limiter? Well, we know that removing one's limiter, or even just breaking through and surpassing your limits, has severe consequences, like I've mentioned before. Some people become drunk with power, some people become enraged, some people just lose their purpose, to not lose their will, as we've seen with Saitama, Boros, and you know, other people who have managed to break through. Also, a lot of people have said that the exact moment Saitama removed his limiter is during that one bonus chapter that we got, where Saitama is constantly turning his head around to see if he is balding because he didn't have two mirrors. So of course, when he is constantly turning around fast enough, I think eventually he just became fast enough to just look in the back of his head. Because he's turning super fast, he's losing all of his hair. You know, I don't really think that's the exact time that he removed his limiter, but let me know what you think on that. So that was the limiter explained by yours truly. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope that I was at least able to get a lot of you thinking. And of course, let me know your thoughts on the limiter in the comments below, and hopefully we get a lot more clarification about the limiter. Hopefully we see why down the line later in the story why Saitama is so special, and hopefully we get a lot more insight explaining God and his connection with the limiter and why he even allows this system to even be in place. I am Amir Punch, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next one. See ya.